Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And I have the most fascinating and interesting guest today. His name is I will edit that out. His name
No,
is
no, I've been fed.
His name is Fred Rutman, and he is a former marketer and college professor who struggled with his health and fitness for years. Fred was making his way to a healthier lifestyle until he had the rug pulled out from underneath him in 2009, leaving him with dozens of concussions, as well as post-concussion syndrome, PTSD, and a medical condition that almost cost him his life. Fred is also the author of the soon-to-be-released book titled The Summer I Died 20 Times. He is here to share his remarkable and inspiring story with us. Fred, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Cheryl. Happy to be here.
I'm
happy to be anywhere.
Well, I'll bet. My goodness, your story is just incredible. I've, read your profile and just kept shaking my head the whole time, because it's just amazing. And yeah, I'm sure that every day you wake up, you're happy to be on this side of the earth.
Yeah. It's highly improbable what's happened to me. Probably, 1 in a billion series of events that, hasn't happened to anybody else that we know of.
Does that make you want to buy a lottery ticket?
I have been, and there doesn't seem to be any correlation. So I guess I'm in a, one or the other kind of situation.
Yeah, I guess so. But this is just an incredible story. And what I found most compelling, just, with this nightmare that you went through, was how you found your way back to health and wellness. And so I'm just going to turn the mic over to you and say, tell us your story, from, going to being a marketing person and college professor, struggling with your health and really getting on that path to be healthier. And then, the stuff hit the fan.
Okay. I guess I'll start off with being born. And I didn't find this out till I was in my mid-30s, but they believe I had a stroke or just before I was born or just after I was born. So I don't know if that's in the material I sent you or not. So I had a whole bunch of dysfunctions that I didn't really know about. And I'm old enough to be in that era in the school systems where they didn't check you for learning disabilities and problems with fine motor skills and stuff like that. So life was a little bit hard for, those first 30, 40 years. And what I was diagnosed with was a right hemisphere dysfunction. So my right brain was working at maybe 50% of what it should be.
Mm-hmm.
So that was sort of my starting point. And then we'll take a big jump to 2009, where I started what the doctors thought was me passing out randomly. And then every time I would pass out, I would hit my head on whatever was the hardest thing in the immediate area, whether it be a manhole cover or a curb or, the cement edge of a commercial sink or anything like that.
Oh.
And so that's where all these concussions came from. So they kept trying to test me to see if I had had a heart attack. And the primary tool for that is drawing blood. And if you have a heart attack, your heart muscle dies and releases a couple of enzymes, which I can't remember the names of right now. That's one of I've had a little memory loss as a result of this. And, you'd think after like getting a negative result 15 times, you'd kind of move off the spot and look for something else, but they didn't. So as I said to you pre-interview, I'm not trying to bash the medical system. It is what it is. And like any other industry, you're going to have a continuum or a spectrum. And at one end, you're going to have the superstars, which I have now. And at the other end, you're going to have the Am I allowed to swear on here?
Sure, go for it.
Do you have the, how the fuck did you get hired and how are you still working kind
And the
of
how
people?
did you get through medical school people?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I seem to have had a number of those, excuse me, at the front end of this venture. And so after about 4 months, they figured out that the problem was my heart was actually stopping.
Mm.
So I have a condition called a full heart block. And if you want
Wow.
to, oh, you know about it?
Well, I have heard of it,
So,
but explain what it is for the audience.
so if you want an in-depth explanation, you can go onto the Cleveland Clinic website. They're the number one rated cardiac hospital in America,
Mhm.
and look up full heart block. And they've got, some good pieces, and there's a video on there that explains it. But simply, the electrical system in your heart distributes pulses of electricity that tell your ventricles and atria when to pump. So that system on me started to die, and it wasn't sending signals telling my heart to pump.
Mhm.
And in full heart block, you can go down to, I believe, like maybe 5 signal beats a minute to nothing.
Oh.
So I was getting a lot of nothing. And I've subsequently learned, just this week actually, that your heart also has some backup systems because your body's designed really smartly.
Mhm.
And even my backup systems were starting to die.
Wow.
So my heart would stop, blood pressure goes to zero, you have no blood and oxygen in your brain, and you're clinically dead. So we guesstimate I was clinically dead, 40 plus times.
So when this happened to you and you would have these episodes, would they have to resuscitate you or where would you be?
Well, I've been anywhere from sitting at my desk marking economics papers. Um, and some people think economics profs should be dead anyway, because to, walking outside, to riding my bike, to,
Oh,
thank God this never happened while I was driving.
yeah.
So, and some of them happened in the hospital itself. So,
So when you were in public, like when you were, either grading papers or when you were riding your bike and you would have that episode, I mean, obviously you would just drop to the ground. Would people stop to help you? How did you recover from that?
um, a lot of the time I was by myself. Um, a couple of times, like once a group of my students found me outside in the campus quad,
Mm.
as I was walking to get the commuter bus, and they assisted me somehow and then left me alone. I think they called the ambulance
Hmm.
and then they left me alone. So apparently I wasn't as good a professor as I thought I was. And for the most part, um, my heart restarted sometimes after 3 to 5 minutes we have on
Hmm.
tape. And we don't know why.
Wow.
I mean, maybe somehow these backup systems kicked in,
Hmm.
but there wouldn't have been a lot of gas in the tank in those
Right.
longer episodes to get things started again.
So how did they finally figure it out? How and when?
Um, so this all started in May of 2009, and then in August 2009, I was actually in a hospital after I collapsed at the campus. And after maybe a week, they decided to put a Holter monitor on me.
Hmm.
And then they decided they were going to kick me out of the hospital for the weekend. Like, it was just medical duh after medical duh. So
Oh,
the first doctor that saw me there was convinced I had something called vasovagal.
hmm.
So is the vagus nerve not your favorite nerve in the body? It
Well,
does
it's one of them.
everything.
Yeah.
Um, so he was convinced I had that condition. So for the audience, that's something that when people see blood or a broken bone or something traumatic, it makes them faint. So he was convinced I had that, except that usually presents itself when you're, you know, in your teenage years. It
Hmm.
doesn't present itself in your mid 40s.
Hmm.
And I have a family friend who's quite an accomplished internist. I called him, and in like 5 seconds, he says, "Oh my God, you need a pacemaker now." And I told the resident on staff that that's what this person diagnosed. And he's like, small town doctor, what the hell would he know? So,
Hmm.
and they, I almost died because of that.
So at one point you did have a pacemaker put in though, didn't you?
Yeah, at the end of this initial um, adventure, they
Hmm.
squeezed me in.
Hmm.
And there's an adage like you never want to be booked on the last plane going out that day,
Yep.
because if it gets, well, he was going on vacation
Oh.
and squeezing me in. So I'm guessing he's thinking of Mai Tais on the beach and whatever.
Hmm.
Um, and I'll loop back around to this, but we now think something might have happened in that initial surgery that caused some of these dominoes to happen later on down the road.
Hmm.
So, but I was asleep, so I can't be 100% certain. So this
Hmm.
is like my Area 51 conspiracy kind of trail.
Well, it is such an incredible story, and there are so many bumps in the road, so to speak, and
Mhm,
convoluted, like how could this happen? Type of situations. Trying to piece it all together,
mhm.
you know.
Well, after they got the Holter, so that was Friday afternoon that I had a major incident, and one of these longer events that they captured. And I think this one was 3 minutes or 3 minutes and 30 seconds that my heart had stopped. And I collapsed in the washroom and I battered my head and I broke my glasses and I had cut over my eye and all that stuff. And I staggered back to the nursing station. And then nurse is like, "What happened to you? What do you think happened to me?" And she says, "Well, hurry it up. We got to get you out of your room." Like,
Wait a minute. So this was the Friday they were going to be sending you home for the weekend?
yeah, we
Oh
think you're
my.
dying. We think your heart's stopping. Uh, Go away unsupervised.
Oh my God. And you had the Holter monitor on, right?
Mhm.
So they would be able to see what happened,
Yes.
but you weren't hooked up to like an EKG at the nurse's station.
I was previous to that. Yeah.
Okay. Jeez.
So maybe we should explain what a Holter is. It's a portable ECG
Hmm.
that records everything that's going on with your heart.
Hmm.
So the version I had was like the 8 tracks of the Holter monitor,
Hmm.
which is named after Dr. Halter.
Hmm.
Um, and now they're just like MP3 players. They're just little tiny things you hang around and they can record for days and days and days. So
So did they discharge you, or because of that incident, did they keep you over the weekend?
um, they tried to discharge me. I fought hard, and um, my roommate had a position of power. I wish I could talk about this guy, but I'm not allowed to talk about him.
Got it.
Um, and he had a position of power there, and he said, "There's no fucking way you're going home."
Well,
And
thank God you had somebody who could speak for you.
yeah, because I was pretty battered. Um, if I was in the state I am today, I certainly would have been pushing back hard and making my case. But yeah, I had to have help for this one. I was really battered.
I think we all do when we're in a situation like that, because we're so vulnerable, and it's so, we're shocked, we're, suffering, we're scared, and we really need somebody to stand up for us, because, unfortunately, the patient is not always listened to.
Yeah. You see nurses 12 hours a day,
Hmm.
but you're lucky if you see a doctor for 5 minutes every 3 days.
Right.
So after uh, the weekend, they had some budget cuts, and there was nobody around to read the halter till Tuesday afternoon. And then Tuesday afternoon, this cardiologist comes running into my room. It's like, holy shit, dude, like your heart's been stopping. Gee, you mean like my family friend said like last week?
See, this is
So
why I don't do video, because my facial expressions right now are like, just like,
they are. You have a very expressive face.
thank you. I was told I was never allowed to play poker.
Well, I don't know. You've got all those swords behind you. I think you could do some pretty good bluffing.
Yeah, I could, but I really have to be, I have to be prepared for it. I can be a pretty good actress, but continue.
So they decided I need the pacemaker, and as I said, it's possible something happened in that surgery that doesn't go onto your surgical record, and I've subsequently learned surgical records are pretty brief.
Mhm.
and they omit a lot.
Mhm.
Um, I haven't seen this surgical brief, but I've seen a couple of my others,
Mhm.
and they just, patient lost consciousness for 20 seconds, but they left out all the drama that happened, around what the results of that passing out for 20 seconds or losing consciousness. So
Wow.
I'll tell that story in a minute.
Mhm. Well, unfortunately, and I'm speaking from someone who did work in the medical field for, 40 years, um, they can cover their tracks pretty well. I mean, sometimes
Yeah.
they can, and sometimes they don't, but
Mhm.
yeah, it's
Well, my sister's a legal nurse,
mm,
um, and she helps lawyers with malpractice and
mhm.
um, establishing standards for the particular hospital or ward that she's in. And she says the big three areas for screwing up are misdiagnosis and miscommunication, um, medication errors, either by the doctor giving the wrong medication or the patient taking it
Mhm.
improperly, and then medical misplacement, which is like, oh shit, where did I leave my Rolex? Oh, it's inside you, you know.
Yeah. Mhm.
So I was definitely on the misdiagnosis, miscommunication side of things.
Jeez. So then, okay, here we are at that weekend. What
Mhm.
happened after that? How did things get sorted out? How did they get you on the right path, so to speak? Or was it something that you had to just do yourself?
It turned out that it was mostly something I had to do myself.
Hmm.
So for the most part, the pacemaker alleviated the symptoms, but there's no real roadmap to bring you back from the trauma I underwent. Like, um, the anxiety, I had memory loss, I had depth perception issues, balance issues, I was slurring words. I had an entire language knocked out of my head.
Wow.
So, um, which is only now, like, you know, 12 years later, starting to come anywhere close to what it was. I mean, I had to relearn almost everything I was teaching. So it was, and there's no roadmap for this.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to follow your instincts, know you have to get exercise because exercise is rarely bad, and exercise your brain.
Mm-hmm.
I subsequently learned there's some other tools I could have been using,
Mm-hmm.
um, but we'll get to that in a little bit.
Okay. So one more question. So were
Sure.
you offered like physical therapy or rehab, or it was just best of luck to you?
It was pretty much best of luck to me.
Jeez. And obviously they knew you had hit your head multiple times. Obviously they knew that you had, cognitive balance and other limitations.
Guess how many neural consults I had?
Oh, don't tell me this. How many? That's what I thought you were
0.
going to say. 0. Yeah. Unbelievable.
I had one nurse come and give me the light test
Mm-hmm.
to see if I had a concussion. Like, I don't even know if that works in it, you
Right.
know, like if your pupils aren't off, you just don't have that one particular type of concussion, I think.
Right.
But it really doesn't tell you much.
Jeez. So after all of this, obviously you weren't teaching. You couldn't teach, could you? Or
No,
were you working in your field of marketing?
nothing. I wasn't functional enough to do that. But after about 4 years of trying to relearn everything and exercising and eating better and things like that, I was feeling like I could go back to work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then it all happened again.
Oh,
So the collapsing and the hitting my head and all that stuff, and went back to the hospital, and the doctors couldn't figure it out for a few weeks what was going on. And one of the reasons was pacemakers don't fail. It's a very low percentage of pacemakers that fail. And I'm in the hospital and they're trying to figure out. A new doctor comes in and he puts his hand on the pacemaker. So for your listeners, I'm putting my hand on the left of my chest where my pacemaker is. It's about the size of a pocket watch. It's a little supercomputer. For me, it has 2 wires running through a vein that go to my heart, and the pacemaker sends the signals to your atria and ventricle to replace the stuff that's died off from me. And when he touched it, he moved it just slightly, and I went,
no.
yeah. So they knew something was up with the pacemaker. Then they had to figure out what was up with the pacemaker.
So when you passed out after he touched it and moved it a little bit, did your heart stop or did you just lose consciousness?
Well, my heart stopped. So
Geez,
because it interrupted the signal.
yeah.
So I wasn't dead for a long time with that one. And so they realized they had to do something, and they figured it out because I'm with the better doctors now. And so they decided that a pacemaker lead, one of the wires, had cracked. So they're just like all the other wires. They're a wire and they have to have some insulation on it, so you're not sending a shock through your entire body. And the lead cracked. Now, sometimes there are batches of bad leads, and the pacemaker company will send out a worldwide alert saying preemptively, we've identified this problem, you should be proactive, replace these. There was nothing, there was no worldwide alert for my particular batch. So it was a one-off. And, possibly there was an incident in my original surgery that we later learned. Sorry, I missed a step here. We later learned my vein had collapsed, and it was like locked tight on the wires that were in there. And possibly something happened in the first surgery that caused that, because nothing happened in the second surgery that would have caused that.
So when you say your vein, is it the one in your leg, the great saphenous vein? Does that sound familiar?
That's the vampire vein, isn't it? No, that's a different thing.
Is it not?
No, this is a vein that runs from your chest directly to your heart. Because
Okay.
it's a return.
Subclavian, probably. It doesn't matter. Yeah. I
Yeah.
was just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's one thing I don't know. So when they brought me into the operating room to fix this, the plan was just a simple, we'll open you up and we'll thread a new pacemaker lead in there and we'll disconnect the old one. They didn't tell me that they changed the procedure and you now do this while you're awake.
Oh, God.
Because anesthetic is, hard on the body.
Mm-hmm.
And harder for some people than others. So they decided they were going to do the awake thing. I was very anxious going in. They swabbed me with some sort of antiseptic that just triggered me, and it made me feel even more anxious and made it hard to breathe. And then they use a laser scalpel on you. So you can actually smell your flesh burning.
Oh,
So I don't know who thinks that's a good setup,
yeah.
but it wasn't. And there's a big monitor kind of scoreboard thing that they use in the pacemaker lab to monitor all your vitals. And right from the get-go, they were having trouble picking up some of my vitals. And I know when my heart's about to stop, because I get that, like micro nanosecond of a warning that something's happened. And I remember being on the table and feeling something, and before it even showed on the monitor, they're like, "Oh fuck, I'm gone."
Yeah.
And then all hell broke loose. So it's not like you see on TV. When somebody code blues or whatever in the ER or on the table, there's not the 8 perfect people that need to be there with all the equipment and all the appropriate medications and stuff like that. It takes a while for people to get there and the stuff you need. So I was resuscitated because I had these pacing pads on me, which are slightly different than the defibrillating pads, paddles. And these zap you, I think, like every 2/3 of a second. So when my heart starts beating again and I come back into this world, I don't know that this is happening to me. And you're getting shocked, like seriously shocked.
I know.
Like
I've seen it.
Yeah. And it is painful.
Yeah.
It's painful. So finally I was able to say, like, I'm back. Whoever's doing this brutal CPR on me, you can stop now.
Jeez.
And because that's what I thought they were doing. I thought they were doing like serious compressions or something. And then one of the doctors said something like, "Shut the fuck up. We're trying to save your life." And then another voice says, "No, keep talking. We want to know you're okay." So then they decided they were going to send someone to find a temporary pacemaker to insert, because obviously this surgery wasn't going anywhere and they couldn't find it. So apparently it's like in a little storage closet somewhere.
And you're awake the whole time.
I'm awake. So I'm hearing and seeing all the chaos, well as I can see from being flat on my back. Then somebody comes back with the pacemaker, but they didn't bring the leads.
Oh, God.
So they sent them off again to like, in the interim.
This does not instill confidence in the patient, even if you didn't already have all of this anxiety and stress ahead of time.
Yeah. It was wild. It was just wild.
I mean, it's almost like unbelievable. I mean, it's almost like, how could this possibly happen?
Yeah, I don't know, but it did.
I believe you.
Um, what they should have been doing while they were searching for this equipment was sterilizing my groin and
Mhm,
putting in some numbing agent, because
mhm.
the temporary pacemaker goes up through your femoral artery,
Right.
and the easiest access is to cut a little opening into your groin
Mhm.
and slide it up there. Um, they forgot to do that,
Oh, no.
so or they didn't get around to it, and yeah, it hurt. Like, so if anybody had getting speared in the groin on your bucket list, I'd suggest taking it off.
I can't believe that. Oh, yes, I can.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. That's unbelievable.
So they managed to get the temporary pacemaker functioning, and it was not exactly anchored in very well. It was a little precarious. So I was put on not just bed rest, but do not move rest, because they were worried that the lead would disconnect from my
Mhm,
heart.
mhm.
I also didn't know that these temporary pacemakers were basically like little 9-volt batteries.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that was also a little shocking, but
So as they were trying to insert that lead or the wire through your femoral artery, and they are literally cutting open your groin, didn't they notice that your vital signs were like going off the roof?
I'm guessing they did, but I don't know that they just knew that that shock wave was keeping me alive, and they had to get an alternate piece of shock wave in there that wasn't going to be as violent.
Oh my God. Okay, so then you obviously recovered from that.
Yeah, so it took about 7 days. They had to wait to make sure I didn't get an infection, because they hadn't used any antiseptic on the area. So I had to go in for, I guess this will be operation number 3.
Mhm.
Um, and this is supposed to be a 25-minute surgery.
My
They do
God.
like 800,000 of these a year. So, and my surgeons, the last 2 were no slouches. Like,
Mhm.
they're very well recognized in their field. So I go in for number 3, and I had a hard talk with the doctors, and I said, I'm not going through the anxiety and everything you did last time. I want a different antiseptic. I want, some sort of suction system to keep that smell off me. I want some extra sedation and all that stuff. And we're in the surgery, and I keep falling asleep. And I wake up and I find the surgeon's like on a video chat with somebody. And what's going on? I get like, shut up, we're trying to save your life kind of answer again. And it turns out they couldn't thread the pacemaker wire through the vein. So my world-class surgeon was calling around the world to find out whether solutions that people had used to solve this. So I don't know how he actually solved it, because I kept passing out. And needless to say, the surgery was longer than 25 minutes.
Oh,
And then again, I was sent on my way with no real plan for recovery.
I can't believe that. Just see ya. Good luck. All the best.
Pretty much, yeah.
So what did you do?
I I actually went back to the exercise as soon as I was able, and I upped my learning. So I come
Mhm,
from the Orthodox Jewish world,
mhm.
and we have some books called the Talmud,
Uh-huh.
which are like heavy legal rabbinic discussions that are just like mind blowing.
Mhm.
And, for people from 2000 years ago, their
Mhm.
deductive powers and reasoning are just off the charts.
Mhm.
I've never learned anything like this.
Mhm.
I know a bunch of guys who have been learning this since they were like 9 years old.
Mhm.
And so they've got a 50-year head start on me.
Mhm.
But they let me in their learning group and I just tag along, and sometimes I follow, sometimes I don't, sometimes they don't even, because the material is so complex.
Mhm.
But just that mental stimulation really helps to heal your brain.
Mhm.
And it's been a pretty big tool for helping me recover from all this head trauma and PTSD.
Mhm.
But it's not the best tool that I've come across. There's a better tool,
Mhm.
which I found out in 2018,
Mhm.
and that is called intermittent fasting.
Mhm.
So, intermittent fasting, I think, is in the news quite a bit these days,
Mhm. Mhm.
and it's mostly talked about for weight loss
Mhm.
or as a diet. It's not a diet because it
Mhm.
doesn't tell you what to eat, it tells you when to eat, which is a different thing. Um, but the research is coming out now, and I guess this is research that was probably started 20, 30 years ago,
Mhm.
about how when you get to a certain fasted state, it triggers all these epigenetic sub-processes in your body
Mhm.
that just achieve all this crazy healing stuff through, uh, you know, activating heat shock proteins and normalizing your hormones, and the process called autophagy, for which Japanese scientists just won the Nobel Prize in 2016,
Mhm.
um, and all sorts of other things that are just going on right now. That I ended up being a moderator in a fasting group on Facebook that had about 335,000 members,
Wow.
and so it was run. Can I do a book plug?
Oh, sure. Yes, absolutely. Go for it.
So um,
Ah,
this is
fast,
fast
feet,
feast,
feast, repeat.
not feet. Yeah, not feet.
Yeah, no, I'm not feet. I'm a dancer. I've got feet on the mind all the time.
Okay. By
Fast.
Jen Stevens.
Mm-hmm.
And she's the one who started this group.
Now, how long has that book been out?
About 2-ish years.
Okay.
She had another big seller before this, Delay Don't Deny.
Oh,
And the Facebook group was the Delay Don't Deny book support group,
okay.
which has sort of been archived for now. You can still read all the answers
Mm-hmm.
to, thousands of questions that have been asked, but we're no
Mm-hmm.
longer actively moderating it.
Okay. So let's
Um,
just give that one more time. The Delay, Don't Deny, and her other book is Fast, Feast, Repeat, and the author is Jen
Stevens with a
Stevens.
PH.
Okay.
Now,
Great,
she
great.
went off Facebook and started her own little uh, non-Facebook controlled
Mm-hmm.
group, which is
Mm-hmm.
much smaller, much intimate, much more Jin involved
Mm-hmm.
in the questions and answering and talk. So that's jinstevens.com/community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's like $5 a month or something.
Mm-hmm.
So, so that's where I hang my hat now.
So, and is that how you found out? Was it through that book that you found out, how to do the fasting or learned all of this? Or did you start the intermittent fasting first and that led you to this book and this group?
I started it first.
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of an entertaining story. I was waiting in my cardiologist's office,
Mm-hmm.
and he comes in and he literally throws this book at me, and I should have it here, but I don't. And he says, "Buy this, read this, do this, but only after we get buy-in from all your other major doctors."
Mm-hmm.
And the book was The Obesity Code by
Okay.
Dr. Jason Fung.
Mm-hmm.
So he's a nephrologist here in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're a nephrologist, you treat a lot of people with diabetes, type 2
Mm-hmm.
diabetes. They're losing kidneys, they're losing limbs.
Yeah.
And he came across intermittent fasting and realized it was the solution many of his patients needed for healing and weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
So he wrote, the Obesity Code. So that was the first book I read.
Mm-hmm.
It took about 3 months for my doctors to get together and decide I could do this or I could
Mm-hmm.
try it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was monitored very, very closely.
Oh,
Part of the story,
you did finally get the A team then,
yes,
if they were monitoring you very closely.
yes. So there are 2 or 3 cardiologists involved, psychiatrist, endocrinologist, family doctor,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I'm missing somebody, but
Mm-hmm.
sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I'll remember you at some point. And because there's all sorts of medications that have to work in sync, and they don't know how these are going to work with fasting, and how often do they have to, send me to get my blood checked and
Mm-hmm.
and all these other things. So within 6 months, sorry, the part I missed out was the first time I went in the hospital, they discovered I was type 2 diabetes.
Okay.
And like most people, when you have diabetes, you have no idea you have diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
And I was off the charts high. Like, if you know your blood sugar numbers, I was like 420, which,
Whoa.
oh, your face.
I told you that's why I don't do video.
Uh-huh. Basically, I had like syrup running through my veins instead of blood.
Oh, jeez.
So they put me on a massive dose of insulin to get my blood down and stuff like that. And at the time, the conventional wisdom is if you're type 2 diabetic, you're going to be on drugs for the rest of your life, and your organs are eventually going to get fried. You're going to lose a kidney, probably going to have cardiovascular disease, blah, 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 probably lose a limb, have neuropathy, the nerves in your extremities are going to die. It's just a bleak, bleak picture.
Right.
So within 6 months of me doing the intermittent fasting, I was no longer type 2 diabetic, and I was off insulin
Wow. In 6 months.
in 6 months.
Okay, so I'm just going to highlight this for my audience. Anybody who's listening who knows somebody who does have type 2 diabetes or, wants to prevent it, that's an amazing feat. That's incredible.
Mhm.
Oh, see, we're back to feet again.
Yeah. I have to do a medical disclaimer because we
Okay.
always have to do medical
Right,
disclaimer.
of course.
So there are at least 3 types of people that should not do intermittent fasting. Women who are pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
women who are breastfeeding,
Mm-hmm.
and people that have had a history of eating disorders. They're on, the do not fly list kind of thing.
Right. Right.
It's possible you can be after you've, had your baby, finished breastfeeding,
Mm-hmm.
and can work with the appropriate doctors if you've had an eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
But off the hop, don't do it.
Yeah.
And then if you're someone like me who's on so many medications, your medications can vary according to your weight. And if your health increases, you might have been on dose A, but now you need like 50% of dose A.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we did with my diabetes medications. They sent me to the diabetes clinic every 2 to 4 weeks
Mm-hmm.
and measured my blood and adjusted my glucometer, which told me how much insulin to take.
Mm-hmm.
So they titrated it down and down and down until I was absolutely off it.
So it was a slow titration then.
Well, 6 months. It went down
Yeah.
in concert with how my blood sugars were doing.
That's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And then how did you feel physically as this was happening?
Oh, you feel much better because there's a million things going on in your body. It seems that the fasting lowers your basal insulin levels,
Mm-hmm.
which seem to be like almost a master control.
Mm-hmm.
And when your basal insulin levels get to their proper range, your other hormones also try to adjust.
Mhm.
And for some people, it's a faster learning curve than others.
Mhm.
Um, so we know that people come off thyroid drugs from this.
Mhm.
We know that people come off their insulin drugs. We know that people who have autoimmune diseases um, come off a lot of the drugs. We
Mhm.
know women that have PCOS can
Mhm.
suddenly get pregnant
Wow.
because PCOS is an insulin driven thing.
Mhm.
Your gut biome heals,
Mhm.
which an overactive gut biome um, causes um, what's it called? Intestinal tract leakage,
Mhm. Mhm.
which allows bacteria to get into your system, and that's a source of many of the autoimmune diseases.
Mhm.
So when you're giving your digestive tract all this time to relax and
Mhm.
get all your numbers in control and get your good bacteria uh, in the proper ratio to your bad bacteria, everything calms down.
Mhm.
All the inflammation goes away. So at one point in my life, I was 340 pounds
Mhm.
and I'm only 5'7". I should be
Mm.
8'11", but I'm not. And I played hockey outside for 40 years because
Mhm.
I'm Canadian. It's a law.
Mhm.
You have to do
Yeah.
that.
Oh yeah, I've heard that.
And, I played football. I played college rugby. My body was pretty abused.
Mhm.
And there were days I would wake up and every joint in my body ached. It
Mhm.
was hard to get out of bed. What am I, 3 years in? Almost 4 years into fasting, I don't have an ache or pain in my body.
That's amazing.
I haven't had a migraine almost since I started. I
Mhm.
rarely get a headache unless it's a little bit of eye strain.
Mhm.
Um, if I get a cold, it's like a day and a half of sniffles and it's gone.
Mhm.
I just don't get sick except for this little thing called COVID you might heard of.
Yeah, I heard that.
Um, yeah, so I had a nasty bout of COVID, but then one of the cardiologists I ran into said, if I hadn't been fasting, I'd be dead because of all my
Wow.
previous comorbidities. It it gave my body enough um, protection
Mhm.
that it didn't go to that final level.
And one of the things that I always say, and I believe this with all my heart and soul, is that the body has an incredible capacity to heal as long as we give it the right environment and the right tools to use to heal with. And so
Mhm,
this is basically what you did. You gave your body the opportunity to, you know, relax, recoup, hit the reset button, however you want to say it, refresh. So it
mhm.
can recalibrate to take you back to like a homeostasis.
Yeah, and the body loves homeostasis.
Yeah.
It wants to get to that. Um, and for many people, I can't say for everybody, but for many people, intermittent fasting is the tool that you can achieve that with.
So when you talk about the intermittent fasting, for how often and how long of a time frame that you do it? I mean, give us just a little bit of an idea of what that is like.
Sure. So for me, I started off doing a 12-12 window.
Okay.
So it was fasting for 12 hours and having an eating window for 12 hours, which didn't mean that I ate for 12 hours. It just meant I had permission during those 12 hours to eat. Um, there's a lot of factors if you've been a yo-yo dieter, what trauma you've had to your body, um, and a whole bunch of other factors, mental state being a big one.
Mhm.
Um, so it'll depend how fast you will adapt to fasting working for you. But what we seem to see is that your body prioritizes healing over weight loss.
Ah.
It wants to get things normalized, and then it'll work on setting your apostat or weight stat or whatever that thing is called.
Mhm.
And so I didn't lose weight for a long time, but I went through a lot of body recomposition where I was shrinking because all that inflammation inside was going away. And is it the visceral fat that surrounds your organs?
Yes.
Yes, and your visceral fat inside starts to go away.
Mhm,
And because it's concentrated around your organs, it
mhm,
really blows you up.
mhm,
So it looked like I was shrinking, but the scale wasn't moving, and that's not uncommon.
mhm,
Um, so I started in May. By September, I had graduated to what they call OMAD, 1 meal a day.
okay.
And I was doing like 22, 23-hour fasts every day. And this was not something I aspired to.
Mhm,
This is just following what my body was telling me, because you go through all this appetite correction
mhm,
and your body, as it gets rid of the inflammation, you start to get all these body signals that you understand now and your
mhm,
body understands. And you can feel that you're actually hungry when you're hungry, and you feel that you're satiated when you're
mhm,
satiated.
mhm,
And it just takes so much pressure off you, not having to meal plan, not having to worry about food 24/7.
mhm,
And a lot of people find food tastes better.
mhm,
Uh, they no longer like food that they used to.
mhm,
So makes healthy eating a lot easier.
mhm.
So I could go on and on. I get a little bit excited about intermittent fasting.
Well, is it any wonder why you get excited about it?
Yeah.
It's pretty
Um,
much changed your life.
yes. The part that's changed my life more or mostly is neurologically, because intermittent fasting releases neurotropic factors
Mhm,
which work on your nervous system,
mhm,
and they work on repairing your nerves
mhm,
and your synapses, the
mhm,
axion and dendrites, and
mhm,
re-strengthening, building new pathways and things like that. You can check Dr. Mark Mosley. He's
mhm,
from Johns Hopkins,
mhm.
some little two-bit school. He was one of their head researchers. He's
Uh,
fantastic. And I think Jen Stevens is doing an interview with him that should be coming out shortly.
mhm.
She has a podcast, Intermittent Fasting Stories.
So, what advice would you give people who are thinking about, well, I want to look into this a little bit more and do my homework and maybe try it? I mean, how would they get started on looking into the intermittent fasting in a safe way? Just learning before they even decide to try it or to talk to their doctors.
Well, they can read the books I've mentioned.
Okay.
Uh, the Obesity Code by Dr. Fung,
Hmm.
um, Delay, Don't Deny, and
Hmm.
Fast, Feast, Repeat by Jin.
Okay.
Um, if they're podcast likers,
Hmm.
that sound right? If they're people who like listening to podcasts, um, Jin has a podcast, the Intermittent Fasting Podcast.
Okay.
Not the most original name, but
Hmm.
uh,
But it
I think
says
they're
it says
close.
what it does.
Yeah, and a lot of it is taking answers from people in the groups,
Hmm.
um, and it's more about how to fast and how to tweak your fasts,
Okay.
because there's just not one way to fast.
Hmm.
It depends on your bio individuality.
Hmm.
So any of those tools are great,
Hmm.
and find somebody like me that
Hmm.
can answer questions for you.
Oh, perfect segue. So, how can people find you? Do you do motivational speaking? I mean, how can you help educate the listeners if they wanted to get a hold of you?
They can find me on my Instagram,
Hmm.
which is repeatedly dead Fred.
Hmm.
And I know that cracks people up.
Yeah, I know.
And my Gmail is repeatedly.dead.fred at
Hmm.
Gmail.
Hmm.
So my ultimate goal is to get the book published
Hmm.
and get my own podcast up and do some motivational speaking,
Hmm.
because there are a lot of people that are going through trying times.
Hmm.
Maybe not exactly like me,
Hmm.
but pretty sure I've walked beside you
Hmm.
on that path.
Hmm.
And um, I want to know that even though it's dark, there can be light at the end of the tunnel.
Mhm,
You might have to advocate a little harder for yourself, which isn't easy.
mhm.
Some doctors have pretty big egos, and there are resources for you that traditional medicine might not present to you, as you found out in your story.
Mhm. Yeah, and a lot of the stories that we have here on the podcast and a lot of the guests is about thinking outside the box, looking at what the other options are and not taking like a dire diagnosis or prognosis as the have all end all, because there are a lot of different alternative methods of healing and modalities out there. And, this is one that, like you said, is kind of up and coming. I mean, it's just, we're hearing about it more and more. And the first time somebody said they were fasting, I was like, "Whoa, that sounds horrible." I mean, I go back to, we always used to do fasts for, around the holidays and stuff with the way I was raised, but that was a little
Mhm,
bit different. We were still eating something. But
mhm.
yeah, I find it fascinating. The other thing I find really fascinating is that through all of this journey that you've had, which it sounds like it would try anybody's you know fortitude, you always kept your sense of humor.
Yeah. Well, I think I've inherited a bit of a resistance gene
Hmm.
from my parents,
Hmm.
and it's strengthened over the years. My parents had a pretty hard life medically,
Hmm.
and even though they don't tell you, we're teaching you resistance and how to overcome adversity,
Hmm.
you sort of absorb it by osmosis,
Hmm.
and that's been very helpful. But I also believe that your personality is the composite
Hmm.
of, the 5 or 7 or 10 people you interact with mostly on a
Hmm.
daily basis. And my circle is just a phenomenal group of people.
Hmm.
They're, they're devout, they're positive, they're willing to help. I can't tell you how many people came to visit me in the
Hmm.
hospital on regular basis. And when I got out of the hospital, they're like, can we bring you food? Can we take you to doctor's appointments? They're
Oh.
just amazing people, except for the one day when uh, about 10 people brought me food at the same time. And I was living in a basement apartment, so I would come up the stairs to the back door, and they all left the food on the front step.
Oh.
And I wasn't able to open my door. I was essentially locked in my apartment. So I had to call my 80-odd-year-old neighbor to come and move everything away and let me out. So
That's a
that
great
was,
story, as well as a metaphor that you were trapped by food.
yeah,
That's pretty
hadn't thought of
interesting.
it that way, but you're right.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite a little bit of a message there. The other thing I loved is how you said you upped your learning and you were studying the Talmud.
Mhm,
And, I don't know really anything about it, but I studied um, a modality called Feldenkrais, and it was based kind of like
mhm,
out of Israel's where it had its roots. And
mhm,
that's where the man who developed the method. But when I went through the training, a lot of my friends would talk about, and I'm going to say it wrong, I'll bet, Kabbalah moments.
mhm.
And one of them was studying, the if it's the Kabbalah, I don't really know, but we would have
Nobody
amazing,
does.
yeah. Okay, great, good. We would have amazing conversations because we would carpool all the time, going to trainings and different events and stuff. And it was just fascinating. It was like I could sit in this car all day long and talk to you about this. So it really kind of opened up a few more dimensions in my life. And it was just really fun.
For sure. I mean, what this has allowed me to do besides heal
Mhm.
is to think critically about things in ways I couldn't do 6, 10 years ago.
Mhm.
And I mean, I'm pretty highly educated. Uh,
Mhm.
I've got an MBA in marketing and finance
Mhm.
and some other certifications. Uh, but I can think of things now and problem solve ways that I couldn't do long ago. It's remarkable.
And you attribute that to your work with the intermittent fasting.
and this high level learning too.
Yeah.
It just shows you how to evaluate things at different levels. Some
Hmm.
of it's frustrating, you know.
Well,
Yeah. Okay. So for example, they'll say, this is the case A, and we're looking at this, and we're trying to figure out, do we rule this way or do we rule that way?
hmm
And then you get all these different rabbis chiming in, having
hmm
rabbi fights.
hmm hmm
And so you go through a number of iterations of the case to try and figure it out. And you think you've got it figured out. And then the book will say, no, you're idiots. That's not even what we're talking about. What we're talking about is item J over there. And it just teaches you to be very nimble.
hmm Well, I guess if you're not frustrated, you're not learning, right?
I guess, yeah,
Hmm
it's a great
Well,
point.
Fred, this has been just amazing. I have loved having you here on the show. I love hearing your story. I am still blown away. And I think, going through my day to day, I'm going to every now and again get that look on my face like, oh my gosh, I can't believe all of this happened. But it's wonderful to see what you've done with all of this. And I am so excited about your book. I cannot wait for it to come out. So I want you to let me know when it does come out, because I would love for you to come back onto the show, talk about your book some more, and yeah, just talk about your experience and where you're at that point in time.
Thank you. If you're an agent or a publisher looking for a great memoir, hit me up.
And that is contact Fred at repeat.
Repeatedly dead.fred@gmail and
Perfect.
repeatedly dead Fred on Instagram.
And you are on LinkedIn.
I am on LinkedIn. Yes.
Yes.
That doesn't seem to be the most popular people for attracting topics of death, but
Very good point. But I did stalk you on LinkedIn, and I'm going to connect with you
mhm.
there as well. So
Okay.
thanks again for being
Uh,
on the show.
my pleasure. Appreciate you having me on.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. I always appreciate you tuning in, and do check out Fred's Instagram. And if you have any questions, because I know some of you out there do email him. I'm sure he would love to address any of your questions and help you out. If nothing else, just cheer you on, and we can all use a little bit of encouragement these days. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.